Guilt, regret, even anger. Some surprising emotions that surfaced after my dad passed away. And underneath all of that was a heavy feeling that maybe I hadn't done quite enough. Maybe I should have visited more, helped more, carried more of the responsibility. But here's the truth that I started uncovering. A lot of that guilt wasn't real. It was a story I had been quietly telling myself for years. And I realized something many women do. We carry emotional weight that was never actually ours to carry. Today, I want to talk about toxic guilt, repressed emotions, and how we sometimes sabotage our own peace when we're grieving. Let's unpack it. I'm Jackie Almer, and this is the Pilot Wife Podcast and Travel Life by a Pilot Wife. You can learn more at pilotwifepodcast.com. I'm currently in Ventura, California, speaking at an event, so I'm recording this in an Airbnb if the sound is slightly off. And also, if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, the background is unique. I'm on a set of stairs. It's the best lighting and the best sound. Now, I shared the details of my father's passing and the year journey that I've taken in the last episode, so I'll link that in the show notes so that you can find it if you haven't had a chance to listen to that. I also want to address some of the guilt and repressed emotions that pilot wives and partners often carry too. Now, let's face it, grief is like an emotional cocktail. I mean, it's a blend of a lot of different things. Grief is rarely just sadness. Common hidden emotions lie within grief: guilt, regret, anger, even resentment, relief even, and that can carry some guilt too. Sometimes we know that it was time for them to pass and we're just happy they're at peace now and resting and no longer in pain. But that can create a lot of guilt. Confusion often follows, and unfinished conversations. Often there's a lot of that. Now, many people think grief should look a certain way, but it rarely does. Let's talk first about the should trap, because I fell into that, and you might find yourself falling into that in a lot of different situations. This is huge for women. There's an internal dialogue that goes on. I should have visited more. I should have done more. I should have helped more. I should have called more. I should have taken care of everything. I should have been the one doing it. But ask the question, who decided all of that? Who put that pressure on you? Often, it is just simply not reality. It's cultural expectations, family roles, personality patterns, childhood conditioning. And I know for me, that was mine, which kind of leads me to the daughter burden. Many daughters, myself included, quietly believe that they must be the one to care for the aging parents. They must be the one to keep family relationships smooth. They must manage emotions for everybody, organize all the logistics. And often that comes at huge cost. The price that we pay is that we sacrifice our own needs. And I had a lot of that. And then I looked around and realized nobody put any of that on me except me. Families are complex. Siblings have different roles, abilities, personalities, and life situations. My own situation is that, as I mentioned, nobody put that burden on me, that guilt trip, or any of that except me. My brother didn't. I don't ever once remember him calling saying, hey, are you going to do this for mom and dad? Or hey, if this happens, will you do this for mom and dad? My parents didn't. They didn't ask me to come and help more or do this or do any of the rest of it. I just slowly began to take all that on. Maybe not even slowly. I look back and as I was processing this, I realized the last 30 years I was carrying guilt that, hey, we're in aviation. I have airline benefits. I should go see them more. And as I even shared in the last episode, they lived in a small, kind of more remote area. It wasn't easy to get in and out of there. Plus, I had a life of my own. I had kids and activities, all of that. And again, every time I say this, I feel like I'm justifying it to you and justifying it to myself. But nobody put those expectations on me but me. So why do we do that? Why do we silently put expectations on ourselves? And let me ask you, are you doing that in any area of your life? Not just with aging parents, but with any area, are you doing that? And are you aware that responsibility in most every situation can more easily be handled when it is shared? And there's nothing wrong with sharing responsibility. Let's talk about toxic guilt versus true responsibility because there's a very important distinction. Healthy guilt is that signal that we get when we know that we've truly done something wrong. Maybe we said something that wasn't cool, we did something that wasn't cool, and we have a little bit of guilt around that. That's normal, that's natural, that's healthy, because that encourages repair of a relationship, repair of our own emotional makeup, and allowing us to process all of that and move past it so that it doesn't continue to fester and come up at different times. Then there's toxic guilt, and that most often comes from unrealistic expectations that we put on ourselves. In a sense, it punishes us for being human, and it keeps us stuck going over and over the story and, shooting on ourselves constantly. So, a key reflection question that you might ask yourself is, was this truly my responsibility? Or was it something that I believed was my responsibility? Repressed emotions and the body are extremely dangerous. Now, I happen to be one that does believe that all disease is created in the mind first. It's called dis-ease. And that doesn't mean that it's not actually showing up in your body as a situation. That doesn't mean that you don't actually have this diagnosis. But I believe that it's the miswiring within our brain and our emotions and repressing all that that allows for disease to grow and fester. And this happens quite often when emotions are pushed down. Emotions don't disappear, even if we repress them. They end up showing up physically. How often do you get a stomach ache? Think about that. If something has happened and you're feeling guilty or you're feeling angry, how often do you feel that in your gut? That is a sign that things are showing up physically. And those repressed emotions over time, it will continue to fester and build up until ultimately it overflows and it creates that dis-ease within your body. A heaviness in the chest, that's another example. Stomach discomfort, I mentioned that, but digestive and elimination issues are very common when we find ourselves stuffing or repressing emotions. Exhaustion. Have you ever had a lot of emotion overtake you and you feel physically exhausted, like you just need to sleep, you need to rest? Muscle tension, brain fog, irritability, heart conditions, cancer, other issues. That is how dis-ease or disease shows up in our body. And so often it's from these repressed emotions, the stress of that. Processing emotions, on the other hand, is truly a form of detox. I mentioned anger. There's a lot of hidden anger in grief. Many people feel anger, but they often feel ashamed to admit it, especially when it involves other people. And some of those anger sources revolve around being angry about an illness or a diagnosis, being angry at time lost, being angry at family dynamics, being angry at ourselves. How often is that anger really and truly self-directed and pointed at us? And even anger at the unfairness of death. Now, I've shared this. I don't feel cheated. My dad lived to 93. He was healthy to the end. He had some vision issues, and I honestly, truly believe that that's what caused him to say, I'm checking out, I'm done. He didn't have any other illness or disease within his body. And he literally had just been in to the hospital and had a lot of tests run, so we knew that. But I still feel cheated in a sense. I still feel angry that I didn't have more time with him. And I've had to allow that anger at the situation to exist and to process it and not hold it in. It wasn't anger at him. I loved him immensely. And sometimes anger at anything doesn't mean that you love that person less. It simply means that you and I are human. The mind has what I like to call a highlight reel. I always say there's your A roll and your B roll, and your highlight reel is your A roll. It's all the great things that we do. But very often when we experience something that carries a lot of emotion, specifically when someone dies, the brain will often replay mistakes, magnify regrets, and edit out all those good moments. The same can be true in any type of relationship. When a relationship ends, which in a sense is what death is, but even a romantic relationship, a friendship ending, disconnection with a child or something like that, we have a tendency to, again, replay those mistakes. We will allow regrets to seem much bigger than they actually were, and we edit out all the good times that we had. But the full story in any situation includes love and those good feelings and those good times, the effort that we put into the relationship, the presence that we had. And it also includes imperfect humanity. Then, of course, we have a tendency to self sabotage after a loss. And again, this can be a loss due to death, a relationship ending, a job loss, anything like that, anything that's emotional for us, we can have a tendency to self sabotage. And those unprocessed emotions can lead to withdrawing, withdrawing from ourselves, from our lives, from others around us. Sometimes it shows up as overworking, right? We just jump in and we just power forward and we push those emotions aside and figure that overworking is going to get us over that. We can numb out. Sometimes we just numb out with TV, with alcohol, with drugs, with shopping. There's all different ways that we can numb out and repress those emotions. Sometimes it takes the form of health neglect. Maybe we overeat or overdrink or any of those things. We stop working out. We just become almost like a human vegetable and we neglect our own health and well being. And then quite often we overthink all of it. The mind naturally keeps trying to solve something that honestly can't be solved. Grief is not a puzzle, it's simply a process. Now, there's a unique guilt that I feel many pilot wives carry, and I know in my own situation this has been true. The I should be able to handle everything when they're gone story. And often we are forced to handle things because they're not there, they're in the air. Now, today with, you know, texting and cell phones and Wi-Fi and all of that on airplanes, some of that is a little bit different. I know back in the day, when none of that existed, there were often times that I just had to make a decision. But when the spouse is gone for days at a time, you often become the default problem solver. You have to. And over time, this begins to subtly and subconsciously create a quiet belief that you should be able to manage everything alone. The house, the kids, family responsibilities, the finances, aging parents, logistics, and be there for emotional support for everyone. Being the on the ground partner, this means that pilot wives often become the one who handles those family emergencies, the aging parents, all of that. We're forced to do that. And often, even if we have that shared responsibility, if it happens at different times, we begin to be the one that takes that on, that starts solving the problems. And then often we find ourselves just powering through and never asking for help and support. And sometimes that can quietly build resentment and exhaustion over time, even when we deeply love and support our spouse's career, and even when we're deeply loved and supported by our spouse. The guilt of feeling resentment is big. Many women feel guilty even admitting that they feel resentful. I love our life, but sometimes I wish I didn't have to carry so much of it alone. Have you ever thought that, felt that way? Or you attend so many events alone? That mix of gratitude and resentment can feel confusing, conflicting, and then many women just simply push those emotions down. When grief exposes old emotional patterns, such as when a parent passes, those old roles can suddenly become very visible. You might realize, like I did after my father passed, just how much I was actually carrying, how much emotional load I was carrying, how often I was the one showing up or felt like I needed to be showing up more. And then how much responsibility we actually silently accept because, in a way, we have no other choice. And that can bring up emotions that aren't just grief. In many families, women naturally step into that role of memory keeper, organizer, caregiver, the emotional bridge for our children in situations, friendships, all of that. It's not uncommon for women to carry an invisible emotional task of labor. But when we take on those roles unconsciously, we can start to believe it is all ours to carry. Now, here's a thought. Being married to a pilot has meant that many times I was the one on the ground managing life. managing all the family needs, managing all the aging parent needs, logistics, and emotions. And I did it willingly, but I also realize now that sometimes I carried responsibilities I assumed were mine and not ones that anyone actually asked me to carry. I want you to think about that and let that settle in for a minute and really reflect on what emotional baggage and responsibility are you carrying that you don't truly need to be carrying. Ask yourself that. Now, one of the things that I experienced, and maybe you have too, and this can be the case with any type of emotion, but certainly I experienced this with my own grief, and that is that well meaning friends can often say things that are triggering. And I recently had that come up. In my last podcast, I shared a little bit of my journey, and I had one friend who said, I heard you say messy life, and I found that to be an interesting choice of words. I don't think your life is messy. I think you had some challenges. And the story that I heard you sharing was familiar because I went through this with you. That's kind of a paraphrase of what was said. And it really triggered me to begin with. I thought, please don't try to tell me how my life is. Please don't try to tell me how to deal with grief. Please don't assume that you were there for all of it because you actually weren't. Now, I am one who believes in the 24-hour rule, sometimes 48-hour rule, and I didn't react initially. And this was not a conversation in person or on the phone. So I was able to stop and reflect on it and ask myself, why is this triggering me? Why is this actually triggering me? Because what I wanted to say is my life does feel messy. Yes, I had a very challenging year, but if you were to actually be there to experience my daughter's diagnosis, my parents moving into assisted living, both of them having injuries, my mom passing, my dad moving in with me, still my daughter's cancer situation, having her head shaved that I actually had to be a part of or chose to be a part of, the emotional toll of the possibility that she won't have children, all of that in the course of a year. And then ultimately my father's death, which was literally 13 days into the second year. All of that made me realize that life did feel messy. I felt like I was literally going from thing to thing to thing and not fully addressing any of it. So it did feel messy because in a way that's like a messy house where you have 5 rooms to clean and you do a little bit in this room and a little bit in that room and a little bit in this room. And then you look around and you think, gosh, my house still looks messy, even though I did some things. So nobody truly goes through your journey with you except you because we share what we're willing to share, but there's so much underneath that never gets shared. And then often people will say things like, well, this is about death for sure. He's in a better place. Everything happens for a reason. You shouldn't feel guilty. Like guilt is a wasted emotion. I know all that. I know I shouldn't feel guilty, but I do right now. So I'm going to process that and move past it. Or I heard, at least you had him for so long. Or I heard, but just be glad. Now, I know this. I try to never use the word but because anytime you say but, you basically negate everything that you said prior to that because it's kind of like, well, you had this, but there's this instead. And most people truly mean well. My friend meant well, and I know that. And a lot of times it comes down to this. People feel uncomfortable with grief. I know I did for years. I have learned so much through this past year about how I handled things poorly in the past with people grieving, how I've handled things poorly in the past with my own emotions. And I learned even more going forward with how I will deal with friends going through all different emotional processes. You don't know what you don't know. And I'm not, again, carrying guilt or anger or resentment at myself for some of those old things. I'm just choosing to learn from it. Friends also, they want to fix things for you. And I can relate to that. I am a fixer. I have said that forever. I am a fixer. So I'm always going to seek to fix any situation that I can. And sometimes, most of the time, people don't want to be fixed. They want to be listened to. Friends also want to reduce your pain quickly. And I feel like a lot of this is to alleviate their own repressed emotions and situations that they've gone through. Because I truly am a believer that almost everything, it's kind of like when you're pointing a finger, 3 fingers are pointing back at you. It's that kind of thing when we project something onto another person. Very often it's self reflection and self projection. Grief is something that simply can't be fixed, it has to be processed. So here's some ideas that I came up with to how to best serve a grieving friend and how I will seek to do better going forward in this area. Just offering to listen and then asking, are you looking for some guidance? Are you looking for some shared experiences of maybe how I or others dealt with this? Ask the question first, because the most supportive things that people can do most often are simple, and it starts with letting people talk. Let them repeat those stories. That was one of the things for me. I felt like what my friend was saying is, yeah, I didn't need to watch your video. I've already heard this because I've heard you say it before. Now, I don't think that's what she really meant, but that's what I heard. People are going to repeat stories. That's their own way of processing emotion, their own way of processing grief. Just allow them to do that because grief is truly processed through storytelling. Also, I'm learning to avoid correcting emotions. Kind of like my friend said, I don't think your life is messy. And so I'm going to do some nevers, which I often don't like to do. I don't like never or always because that creates a situation that isn't most often true. But things I'm going to not say in the future. You shouldn't feel that way. Instead, I'm going to say something like, wow, I'm sorry you're feeling that way. And it sounds really hard. Why do you think you're feeling that way? What would it help alleviate that for you? Is there any way that you can process this and then shift that feeling that would feel more emotionally supportive to you? And again, all of these are things that you have to be careful and ask permission before you just weigh in. And above all, don't analyze anybody else's situation because you never know the whole family dynamic, the whole relationship dynamic, the whole situation dynamic. Situations, people, families are extremely dynamic, and we never have anyone's whole entire experience of anything. You can offer presence and not solutions. Offer presence and not solutions. Those are simple phrases. This sounds so cliche, but it's true. I'm here if you need anything. I'm thinking of you. Tell me about this person who you've lost. Tell me the stories that you have of them. Instead of saying, let me know if you need anything, you can offer specifics even. Could I bring you a meal? Could I help run errands? Could we just walk together? Grief has a way of revealing the stories that we carry about ourselves, stories about what we should have done, right? How we could have been better, who we should have been, or what role we were supposed to play in our mind, the role that we were supposed to play. But healing begins when we start truly questioning those stories and allowing ourselves to be human instead of being perfect. Did you get that? Allowing ourselves to be human instead of perfect. If you're carrying guilt after losing someone, maybe today is the day to gently put some of that weight down. I'm Jackie Almer. Learn more at pilotlifepodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next show. Hey, pilot wife and fellow aviator, I'm Jackie Almer. With nearly 4 decades as a pilot wife, I'm here to help you navigate the ups and downs and turbulence that can go along with this lifestyle. To learn more about the resources and coaching I offer, go to pilotlifepodcast.com and make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, Travel Life by a Pilot Wife.